Hello, everyone. I can see that we have already some people online. Welcome to the Leadership Point of View, which is an inspirational live half podcast, half webinar series that we are hosting. I'm Hugo Pereira. I will be your host for today. And to give a bit of the concept for the newcomers, I see some people already are on their second and third point of view. But for the newcomers, this is a new trial at the new methods of getting inspiration on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. 25 minutes, up to 30 minutes or 25 minutes webinar. 20 of those minutes are, 15 of those minutes are mostly hearing the point of view of the speaker or the guests. After that pitch, uninterrupted, we'll go through a Q&A and a conversation using the chat. So you can use the chat, which should be quite visible for your Q&As. Throughout the presentation, you can just share the question. I'll pick the question afterwards once the guest finishes the point of view. With that said, also an invitation to close all your tabs, devices. It's just 10 to 15 minutes uninterrupted attention. It seems that it's not that hard, but I know that in today's world, this is a little bit more challenging. But I highly recommend to bring the best and take the best out of the engagement, since you already took the time to be here. A few questions that happen afterwards. Yes, the replay will be available right after. I think an hour after the webinar is over, you're going to get the replay, so you can use it at will. And Vanessa is also going to share at the end how you can reach out to her if you want to be in contact with her. Speaking of our guests, today we have Vanessa Monsequeira, or Ness. She combines quite an expertise as a business psychologist, agile coach, and overall a technologist, focused on cultural transformation. She currently leads today the global people function at Gorilla. It's a Series B SaaS scale-up, and she previously had leadership roles in people functions at Miro, PwC, Deloitte, Philips, always focused on scaling cultures and shaping people's strategies. She got my attention when she started posting about her 90-day onboarding publicly. So almost like onboarding in public, which I found quite fascinating. And we interacted a few times already, despite living in Amsterdam. We never met in person, but we find our way to connect digitally. With that said, today she's going to share her point of view on the strategies for first-time leaders in a scale-up, and go into the leadership journey in a scale-up. I know a lot of you are in that hyperspace environment, and there's a lot to learn from those. So the complexities of guiding teams and many other things. With that, I let you, Vanessa, take over and share your point of view. Thank you.
Brilliant. Hugo, thanks so much for having me. And for those who are live on the webinar who will watch later, it's great to be here. So something I'm really passionate about is first-time leaders and middle managers. I think a lot of money gets thrown at executive leadership, sometimes first-time leadership. And I truly believe it's the first-time leaders and middle managers that are going to change and shape our society. And it's so sad that it's so underinvested, and most of us get to leadership or executive levels and we've fumbled upon our way and different skills. So this is something I've been looking at in my early days in Big Four consulting, but then I joined Miro during its hyper growth scale up, going from 350 to 1,000 people in 2020 during the pandemic. And I was like, everything I thought about leadership development went out the door, because when you are scaling that quickly, you need to have different ways to learn, digest, have peer learning groups, and have that design. But I also came across other pieces as well. So I'm going to share a series of mini points of view today, and I'll also sometimes share my screen, because I think a lot of us hear things theoretically, but we're like, what does that look like in practice? Okay, so my first point of view, I'm going to share, if you can see it, I'm actually going to scroll up here. Let me know, Hugo and people. Yeah, okay, so this is my first point of view, that 80% of leadership is leading self. And sometimes when I ask first-time leaders, like, what are your biggest challenges of leading self? They're like, what does that mean? So then the first thing is just understanding a common model that in leadership, we know that there is leading self, leading others, leading teams, and then leading the organization. And you can have a look at this. I won't go into all the little dot points, but I'd like to discuss why that's so important. So I'm going to stop the share and talk about why is leading self so important. So maybe at a first time leadership, it's more like 50-50% learning skills, 50% leading selves. So when I was at Miro, now I'm at Gorilla, I always, before we look at our leadership development strategy, instead of taking a cookie cutter approach, I use a human-centered design approach. The first part of that is doing discovery and speaking to each of the first-time leaders around like, hey, what do you think you're doing well? Why do you love being a leader? What keeps you up at night? What are you struggling with at leading team and leading self? And invariably, something that really comes up is, for some leaders, it's really about that imposter syndrome. Like, can I do this? Will my team like me? Before I was their peer and now I'm their leader. So a lot of it is the inner world. The second part might be around how do I manage and prioritize my own time and workload in a hyper-growth startup? So a lot of it is really having those skills to manage yourself, your time, your environment. And also, I think something we talk about not enough in the world of work, and in particularly in scale-ups, is how we're managing our own emotions and physiology. So that's my second point of view. Don't fight your physiology. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling stress, emotions are signals. And I think if you follow the work of Susan David, Brené Brown, there's no negative and positive emotions. There's just difficult and less difficult, difficult and easier emotions. So a lot of the times for first-time leaders, when you're managing yourself, particularly in a scale-up environment where it's going really quickly, nearly every first-time leader I've talked to in a scale-up is like, I'm scared that I won't be able to keep pace with the company, and they either won't be able to keep up and will leave, or they will get leveled. So a lot of the times people try and fight that fear with more work instead of sitting with discomfort. And I would say nearly 90% of leadership, I'm just throwing some self-stats here, Vanessanomics, is around sitting in discomfort. Whether you're worried about making a hard decision and your team won't like you, whether you have to deliver difficult information or a performance review and improvement plan, whether you have to agree with a decision from the company that you might not fully agree with in your own ethics. A lot of it is just sitting in discomfort. And most of the times what leaders skip, because they're trying to learn all the quote unquote hard skills, is the inability to manage and observe their own physiology and their environment. So a very different point of view. And I think it's slowly creeping in to different leadership training, even MBAs. But I think the leaders who are able to watch their mindset and manage their physiology are going to excel, because pretty soon learning the skills around prioritization and different ways of working are easier. And I'd often say that it's the skills when you need to prioritize, do a talk, develop strategy, execute strategy. The things that block us aren't always the skills. It's often an emotion or a fear that blocks the actual skill set as well. So they're my first 2 points of view. The first one being 80% of leadership is leading self, maybe more of a 50-50 split in first-time leaders. And the second one is don't fight your physiology. My third point of view, which I'll share a picture again, is sorry, getting used to the share function here. Share screen, window. Here we are. Sorry, I'm just going to do a tab. So the next point of view here is around what skills you need to know for the first time as a leader and middle manager as a scale up. So this is part of the reason I started my own sort of side consulting along with my day job called Jungala, in Sanskrit word for jungle, because I think we need to rewild careers and leadership. But it kind of follows maybe 4 buckets. One is leading essentials, leading self, leading others, leading teams, leading orgs. And I think the first thing, like I said, is really leading self. I think they're critical skills for first-time leaders, listening to the inner critic or the imposter phenomenon, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, and looking at how do you flip that to inner confidence. Managing time and priorities is one of the hardest ones. Before you were individual contributor, now you're a leader. And designing your own leader approach. So at this phase, you're listening to different models: situational leadership, authentic leadership, extreme ownership. You're listening to all the different parts, but slowly starting to craft your own leadership as well. So I'd say they're the 3 for first-time leaders. And then there are other modules as well that you need to think about in terms of leading others. The biggest jump, I'd say, for first-time leaders is delegating and empowering others, trusting that your team is the one that's executing for you. And I won't go through all of these, but also performance management essentials. So a lot of these are essential modules, and I'd really, for first-time leader, encourage leading self and leading others. If you're going to just look at one thing in leading in leading organization, it's looking at how you bring the mission and vision to life for the organization and also lead through change. I'm going to stop the share because I think sometimes when there's too many words, people get confused. But I think, the biggest challenge here for leaders is like, how do I cascade those skills? And that probably brings me to the next point of view. What you need to learn depends on your own individual development plan. So for leaders, that really means doing a bit of a 360, having a performance review, getting upward feedback, peer feedback, and feedback from others to help say, what are the modules that you'll go after the first and build the bread and butter basics. And for part of that, I think a lot of the times in social media, the word leader and manager are pitched against each other. Like managers are bad, managers micromanage, and leaders are visionary, and it's all bullshit. I'm not sure if I can say that, Hugo, but it's bullshit. So in the literature and in practice, you need to lead and you need to manage. So leadership, you can think of the more sort of visionary. Where are we going? What's our North Star? And how do we energize a workforce towards that? And management is more around what are like the operational skills we need to know around OKRs, KPIs, budgeting. How do we do managerial operations to keep things running for our teams? So I'll give you an example. If you have an amazing leader and they show you the North Star and your team is energized, and then it comes to performance review and they didn't know how to do your review well, and they didn't work with the people team or HR, and they missed a cycle, and then they were like, oh, sorry, we didn't put you up for promotion. Oh, sorry, I didn't understand the budgeting and what I could do for bonus or remuneration. That's a clear piece of managerial ops that leader has missed. And you want someone knowing how to do the managerial ops and the leadership, because as an employee, yes, you want vision and inspiration, but you also want to be remunerated and valued. And that is a core part of managerial ops. The second flip inverse is you have a manager who's on point, you're delivering on time, on budget, your targets are clear, and everyone's kind of knows what they need to do, but it's just really boring. And you're kind of like, where are we going with this? Is this all there is day in, day out? So that's that piece around being able to do both, is where a human who needs to lead and manage supercharges their way forward as a team member. So leadership and management are not opposites. They are two parts of a Venn diagram that work beautifully together. Let's get more into the meatiness. We're kind of going into some of our final two or three points of view. So the next point of view is around something that I see most leaders actually at all levels trip up on, is knowing when to direct and when to empower. So everyone wants autonomy and wants to be able to not be seen as a micromanager, because everyone knows that micromanagers are the easiest way to exit great employees from a company. But what I've found, particularly in scale-ups, is there's this fine line where people are so hands-off, and I'm definitely at fault of this across different parts of my career. You want to be seen as the leader who empowers and gives people autonomy, but then you realize, oh, no, they were kind of giving me signals, or afterwards they were doing small fails where really they needed more direction. So when I was at Miro, we looked at some of the different teams, and I worked with some of our agile coaches and developed this model. It's kind of based on situational leadership, but it's the flip, kind of looking at situational teaming. So what the hypothesis is there are two axes. So teams that are low collaborative and high collaborative, and teams that are high performing and low performing. So if you have a really high performing team, but they aren't as collaborative yet because maybe they're forming together, they're going through the forming, storming, norming cycle, perhaps they need to be more highly directed. Another team could be you have actually a team of quote unquote A players or super amazing people, but they're not working together. Maybe there's egos there. Maybe they're playing by different rules of different games because they're from different high performing companies. At a certain point as a leader, you're going to need to step in and be a little bit more highly directed. It's not micromanaging, but it's really kind of saying, guys, here's the North Star. This is the why, the when, and you might even need to give elements and help them build the how. As opposed to being highly collaborative, where you as a team leader are going, okay, team, here's the North Star. You all know what you're doing. Go forth and conquer together. And they are able to do the how. They might even be telling you the why, the what, the when, and the how as well, because they've got that level of acumen. But what this really depends on is the people in the team, the level of capability they have, and their time together as a team as well. What we don't want is people who are low collaborative and low performing. Generally, that goes into bureaucracy. In scale-ups, I'd say the biggest thing that I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed as well, is where we have teams where like, yes, we're a scale-up, we're collaborative, we love working together, but for some reason, there's not cut through and performance in results. And often this is a consensus chaos because in the early days of a scale up where it feels like more of a family and you might have had 20 or 30 people and the communications were super easy, everyone was on board. But as you start scaling and you reach something called Dunbar's number around 150, everyone reaches cognitive capacity. You need better documentation, better processes. And eventually, because some of this is like a perfect mess of needing scale, the scaling processes and ways of working, we reach this sense of consensus chaos where everyone's trying to agree, but there's like no clear unwritten rules being made explicit of how things are done around here. So the idea as a leader is to kind of sense where your team is, understand the stage your team is in terms of forming, storming, norming, performing, the capability and the level of the team members, and then creating the right environment. So you can choose whether your team, you as a leader, will initially be in a highly directive mode for a certain period of time, or whether you will and start there and put your team in more of a highly directed mode and then move to empowered teams, or whether you will move from either bureaucracy or chaos, consensus chaos, to straight to an empowered team. And to be honest, they're not just linear transitions as a leader, because there'll be different phases, organizational restructures, changes in the economy, things like COVID. You might bounce between being highly directed and empowered. The importance is really telling team members which stage you're in and telling them the why. So I think that's my biggest piece is don't fear being directive at certain points. And often if you're a new leader in a team, there might be more of the orange. It's just not staying in the orange for a long amount of time. That is your role as a leader, to build the skills in your team to get them to be empowered. And so how do we do all of this? How do we move from a very traditional leadership development way of working to more of a empowered way? And like I said, have fit for purpose, bite-sized training for first-time leaders. It's really making it just in time and bite-size. So what I would recommend, this is a little bit messy, but it's something that I'm going through at Gorilla. And after this, I will wrap up because I'm getting the signal from Hugo, is the ability to design something. This is very messy, but I've been testing this with some of our team leaders, is having short bite-sized like lightning leadership sessions where there's only like 15 minutes or 20 minutes maximum of content. And then the rest of that 1 hour is either role play or having fireside chats with different leadership executive members or guests to test how they did certain skills. And then in between, it's a really closely facilitated peer learning group. So peer learning can happen by accident, but by design, it's so much stronger. So there's different ways of facilitative consultation. If people are interested, I can write a post or you can reach out to me. So that's this idea of having bite-sized knowledge that around key skills that people truly need and peer learning in between it. And then what we're getting to do is, after I've done discovery with the leaders, is get the leaders to vote on some of those modules that they think are important, instead of us just forcing different modules down people's throats. But we as a leadership function, executive team, and the people function have also seen, here's where we think they need to go. So it's this piece of building together and building for people and with people in a bite-sized way. So my prototypes are always very messy. I will eventually share more about this. But just to recap, the 5 points of view from today have been: 80% of leadership is leading self. As a leader, don't fight your physiology. Skills for first-time leaders and middle managers should really focus on leading self and leading team. The key skill in leading organization for first-time leaders is leading through change. And know when to direct your team and when to empower. Being directive is not micromanagement. And finally, more for people teams and first-time leaders, designing bite-sized content that is scaffolded by peer learning groups is the core to first-time leadership in a scale-up.
Thank you. This was very packed with insights. I already see questions coming in. Thanks for sharing all these insights with us, Ness. I took a lot of notes, so I'm curious about quite a few things. I'm going to go and pick up some of Becca's questions, but before we get there, one of the conversations that triggered me was conversations about people going to first-time leaders. And I'm wondering about your view on being a people manager versus an individual contributor.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know if they are ready to be a people leader, but that's normally the only path or the known path to higher salary, higher reputation, higher decisiveness. So how would you go about that? Is it that people need to understand the conversation about what it means to be a people leader? Is it that the organization should shift and find a path for individual contributors as a fallback? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, this is very timely for us. So as an organization, we're currently going to put careers and career levels and career progression in place. I think traditional organizations struggle a little bit with this. I think tech scale-ups are doing maybe a better job, if you like, and I can share a slide on this. So what we're doing is we're decoupling career growth from leadership or management, because we know a big mistake is throwing people into a management or a leadership position because they just want to grow. So like, okay, the only way I can grow is to lead a team, but they don't want to be a team leader, and that damages teams' performance and impact as well. So we're looking at dual career pathways. So you can choose management is a pathway, and I'll share this, and leadership is a pathway. So you can see this, everyone starts, if you're more junior, as an IC, individual contributor, and then you can choose a different track, and there's different levels. The IC3, individual contributor band track, and TL3 track are the same pay band based on job family, and that's based on market data. So it's not that you will be more senior, it's up to you. You can be an IC3 and get paid just as much as a TL3, but it's because you've chosen the craft of, let's make something up, data engineering, as opposed to you've chosen the craft of leadership and management in data engineering, and you'll be equipped with the skills to do either. And that also stops people, if you are truly being measured on what matters as a leader, you'll be measured on leadership, not on your individual contributor skills as a leader. So it also helps delineate leaders wanting to go and micromanage and do the individual tasks. So for leaders, I always say you're truly only managed on two things. One is your team growing? Is your team growing both in terms of headcount and personally and professionally? And is your team delivering outcomes? Everything else is a sub-function of that.
Okay, no, thanks. I really like the visual, and it's a really great way of, especially the differentiation of this is a level, this is a track, because it's quite a different mindset for both.
Yeah.
Picking up on some of the questions, one of them from Becca about that you mentioned the Tuckman's 14 phases, which is a model built from the 60s, where a lot of companies were on a manufacturing path. Software as a service was not even a thing. So how applicable do you see the model today?
I see it solved. There's not many things that are still applicable from a very old school way of hierarchy and ways of working, but I think Tuckman's model observationally as well, it plays out. Like I see it in every team, particularly at Miro. I had a whole team of agile coaches where we would look at how we accelerated teams from forming, storming, norming to performing. And I think now more than ever, you'll see work from Kim Scott in Radical Candor and Brené Brown in Dare to Lead. The storming phase is the most critical part of that. It's not just that it's not that we need to avoid it, it's that it's necessary, and most teams try and avoid it. And if you want a more contemporary model, I think Tuckman's model really juxtaposes really well over Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team as well, particularly around that accountability or false sincerity. So I'd say, even if you were just going to choose one part of Tuckman's model, it's effective storming. And in my opinion, effective storming is what will unlock diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. You put diverse groups of thinkers and people together, you need them to storm effectively to get beyond some of the differences and achieve those true amazing outcomes.
Okay, no, that's a really great point. And all of them need to be adapted to modern times, but the philosophy and the foundation seems to be the same still. We also have a question from Nora, which is quite interesting. First, thank you for the amazing resources. And what is your view on skill-based talent management? Yeah, and how early would you say that is the time to invest on a skill journey for a scale-up?
Nora, this is such a juicy question. It's so real for us at the moment. So for transparency, I'm not a really early stage tech scale up or startup person. So I'm generally more sort of, at the moment I'm going from their transitions from A to B, and then it's more like B to C, C to D is more my area. So I think potentially A to B or pre-seed, it's too early. You just need generalists kind of coming in and willing to do things. I think B to C, in my opinion, and maybe it's because I've been in it, so I'm biased, is the hardest part of any scale up. It's that, hey, where the family feels, and we used to be able to just, communications used to be easier. Now you're like putting in structure and process, and people are like, are we becoming corporate or bureaucratic? So I think B to C is probably, or if we're going to say numbers, somewhere around 80 to 150 is a time to maybe start thinking about it. My question back to you is like, what, or to us, is what level of fidelity or integrity do you need that skills map? So the first thing is just a levels map that you can get off the shelf from Figures or Pave, and that's just pure levels of like agnostic skills people need. And then where, at least I can tell you at Gorilla, we're going to start looking at high level skills based maps at about 100 people in Q1, Q2 next year. And initially, once again, don't reinvent the wheel, we'll kind of go off the shelf. There's different models from Clio that's open sourced, and Leapsome if you've got their software. So I think bringing that in, but I think you also need to take a pulse on your organization, the maturity, capability, and what is the need from this for the skills map as well. Example, if people are saying, where's my career progression opportunity, and you think there's going to be attrition, perhaps that's the right answer to go with that.
Okay, thank you. Before I get to one more question from Pekka, I do have one that was particular in your conversation when you're sharing the point of view about directness versus empowerment, which feels very adequate to the time, or to the conversation going on founder mode versus manager mode. I don't know if you've been around that conversation.
A little bit, yeah.
And especially in a scale-up environment, we know that the founder culture and the founder personality or behavior influences quite heavily the overall culture. So what is your take on this whole founder mode versus manager mode conversation, and why do you think it's bringing such a hot topic? Why people are so personally connected to it, and what is your angle on it? And I think you shared it already quite a bit during this conversation of direct versus empowerment, but still, nonetheless, I would like to hear your thoughts on this conversation.
For me, and maybe Pekka had a good point, like a lot of these are just all models, and maybe it goes back to my point of finding your own flavor of leadership and then understanding that context. So for me, whether it's founder mode, whether it's manager mode, it's situational. So even between founder and founder that I've worked for, it's very different. I think it's just the ability to be able to switch modes, to be honest, and not stay in one predominant mode. You might be switching because of the scaling journey. And I think the other reason that you might switch between the founder mode and the manager mode is very team dependent or organizational phase dependent. So it's kind of maybe not the best answer because it's another one of those depends answer. I'm not in either camp. My camp will always be situational leadership and situational teaming. Look at the ethnographics, look at the psychographics, and then choose your mode based on that.
Okay, no, thanks. One last one from my end, to be mindful of time for everyone, and then I'll pick up on Pekka's last question. Seems a good one to wrap up. A lot of 80% comes from self. A lot of traditional organizations go around investing quite a lot on assessments and personality assessments, for example, as a way to understand yourself and the team. And what is your personal view on personality assessments, or because it's quite an investment at times, especially in a scale suddenly have quite a budget investing on all these assessments. And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on these, knowing that it's not a black and white conversation, but nonetheless.
I have a very clear point of view. If you're going to invest, don't invest too much. I'm not saying that they're useless. It's understanding the usefulness. And let's be honest, you can read I'm going to say it. MBTI is my least favorite. I think it's a pseudoscience. I think they have absolutely trashed what Carl Jung meant by extroversion and introversion as opposites. He sees them as like over each other. So I think all of them will be flavors, even though they'll say we have high psychometric validity and reliability. Take them with a pinch of salt. My question is, why are you using them? And most of the time I see them misused as pigeonholing people. You're extrovert, you're introvert, you're sensing, you're judging, you're a driver, you're an integrator. So I think use them as a frame to understand, but that understanding should enable you to ask more questions. So one, don't invest too much in it. Two, I still think they're useful. And if I was going to use one, it would be like DISC or HBDI, linking that back to first-time managers. If you're learning things with 100 string of letters, or there's also the 16 personalities, too much. We don't have time for that in scale-ups. What we need is a quick frame of reference. So people having 4 different personalities sort of or working preference styles, and how do they work with each other and how do they clash? How do I get diversity of approach in my team? Because do I have someone who's like a very big picture thinker, all big picture thinkers and all hard drivers, but I don't have a really analytical person showing us the data to say you're going in the wrong direction? Then I think it's useful. Once again, I would never pigeonhole my team in that. I'd say, how do you want to grow? But as I'm looking at my team composition right now, I'm hiring, we don't have someone in that very sort of deep analytical detail focus. So I need that. So to that extent, they're useful. Otherwise, I find them as a pigeonholing tool and people cling too far to them. And if you're using ones where you have to get an external facilitator to run it for the whole company and pay heaps of money for every test, put your time in something better. Micro learning, AI-based learning through platforms like Sana Labs. There's better ways to spend your money, and personality psychometrics don't have the validity or the reliability, in my opinion, to be spending heaps of time on.
Thanks. To wrap up, unless there was another question I missed, but I don't think so. Final question from Pekka. Will you recommend any accessible sources for leaders if the company does not provide the kind of training that you talk about?
So in terms of bite-sized leadership or leading, there's heaps of like different resources in terms of like following people on LinkedIn, and we can put posts out. I think Dave Klein does some awesome stuff that I've followed. There's other amazing people in my community. I think it's a really tough one. Like, I would also recommend just looking on Coursera, but I have to be honest, I haven't found heaps of really good bite-sized modules. Something I am doing is putting a Notion page together, which some of the stuff that I showed you today, I'm going to just start open sourcing it, so different metrics and different pieces. But if anyone else like knows, share those. But I think the more of us who are going on actually different portals, so one I will recommend is Open.org, started by Adam Horn and John Faulkner-Wills. And that's like trying to create more transparent, open organizations, and they have an open handbook. So there's like a manager playbook that a lot of us contributed to and open sourced. But pure trainings like Pekka or other people, reach out if you want like micro videos. I was thinking about putting them out there. I'll have a think about that. But I think the reason I keep bringing this up is as a leader, I've seen this as a gap in the market. That's why I've kind of started Jungala as a side piece and a hobby, because my passion is just making sure the world of work and the next generation of leaders aren't dependent completely on their organization's budget to get bread and butter basics.
No, thanks. This is incredibly valuable. On my end, maybe to add to Beck, one not a knowledgeable source, but one thing that helped me a lot at early stage of first time leader was I built my own peer community. So I had 4 to 7 people that we met regularly, and we are all passionate about leading people, scaling up organizations. So we met like once a month for breakfast or lunch or just a connection, and that peer network still exists today, and it helped us a lot because we're sharing each other's resources, the inputs, and we even use each other's materials from different companies, which perhaps was not the most confidential way of doing things, but the community was quite strong and quite good in that sense. So maybe just as a starting point, who in your community could be a good fit to help you out. Okay. With that, and also being mindful of time for everyone, thank you again, Ness, for joining in. And for everyone else, the replay will be available shortly. And one final thing, how can they connect with you if they are not connected, Ness?
Yeah, reach out to me. LinkedIn is probably the best source. So Vanessa Monsequeira on LinkedIn. Okay. Please bear with me if I am a bit slow on the messages or the inbox. If it works more like Gmail, it'll be better with nudges. I also write a newsletter. It's been a bit slow. So yeah, as much as possible, I try and answer questions. If I get heaps of questions, I might put it into a post to help more people. But yeah, let's just kind of improve leadership and the world of work together.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.